Alrighty then, let's dive straight into today's webinar, Figured for Dairy Farms. Thank you very much for attending, everyone. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Nick. I'm from the Customer Success team here at Figured. And again, if you have any questions while you're using Figured, please feel free to reach out to our team using the chat bubble on the bottom right-hand corner of every page. So moving ahead, we're going to be covering how Figured works for dairy farms today, starting from the setup in Xero and the chart of accounts that we offer. Then we're going to do a wee comparison between upstream and downstream work, so how you can use Figured throughout the year in order to make the most of the reports that we make. Then we'll cover creating some of your trackers, building out the budgets in those trackers, and then some of the unique reports that you can now get out of Figured because you've put in all of this information. Then right at the end, we'll cover this off with a little bit of info around our enablement team, and then we'll also have a live Q&A too. So starting with upstream versus downstream work, there are two ways to use Figured throughout the year, and generally we see most people will do this upstream, and what that means is that you're recording all of your sales and purchases from Figured and then posting them through into Xero. Otherwise, if you're using Figured just at the end of the year for your end of year valuations, generally you'll be using this downstream, which means that you're entering everything into Xero and then you're going to go into that into Figured later down the track. The question really is, are you using Figured regularly or are you going to be using this at the end of the year? Most farmers find it easier to enter those invoices directly into Figured, which we then post through to Xero so that the accountant can go through and do the reconciliation and the like. And generally, we recommend using Figured at least in line with your GST periods. But I was talking to an accountant the other day who mentioned that their clients use Figured about once a week, which is a really good way to make sure that your stock rec is all up to date and that you have the most valuable information sitting there in Figured. Then when it comes to Figured in Xero, we're all about adding the production, and Xero is all about holding all of those finances. So we provide a chart of accounts that you can modify and enter into Xero in order to make the most out of the tracker mappings and make the most out of getting data out of there. These are the accounts that you're going to be mapping to a tracker. So all of your actuals exist in Xero. That's the main source of truth. And then you can map them through to Figured, and then we add extra information around the production, like the quantities or the stock classes or the weights. We're specifically looking for direct costs for purchases as an account type and revenue for our sales here. We'll go through an existing chart of accounts that I have set up a little later too. Then we're going to go through creating a tracker, and a tracker is really where all of that production information sits. Depending on how your Xero file is set up, you'll either have a single sale and purchase account, which is quite common with quite small farms or quite large farms. The reason for it is that it's really nice and easy to get started. But within New Zealand, we find that most people have individual sale and purchase accounts for each stock class. That means that you'll have a sale account, say, for mixed age cows and a purchase account for mixed age cows. And you'll have that for each of your different stock classes. The stock classes in Figured are standardized as well, and it makes valuations a lot easier because we can plug in with the different tax schemes. Then we're going to go through using the milk tracker, which is really built around that milk season, June to May. It's independent to your financial year, so you can still do your milk budgeting based around that season and then work that in with your financial budget, say if you had a March balance date. We support many milk companies, but specifically we bring through the kilograms of milk solid production through using Fonterra's Farm Source. For the other ones, you'll have to manually enter in the production quantities, but we do provide the prices in there and we try to get those up to date as much as we can. Then we have the season overflow tool, which is a tool to bring retro payments and cash payments across different budgets and into different years. You can enter in your own prices when it comes to budgeting as well, or you can use the company prices. And whenever there's an update to a milk price, we'll give you an alert within Figured that you can then use to update to the latest price. When it comes to stock valuations, this is using the actual data that you've entered into your production tracker. We have another webinar that's on our YouTube channel, which is all around that 3-step end-of-year reporting process. And I recommend heading up to our channel if you want to learn a little bit more about that. The valuations are linked specifically to those quantities and to the stock classes that you're using. And we can use that to either generate your year-end valuations, so for tax purposes, or your management valuations, which are for, say, if you want to have the market value for your livestock sitting there in Xero too. So let's jump straight in and go through and do a worked example in Figured. I've got a dairy farm that I've already set up here, so we're going to go ahead and log in. This one has already been set up and we're already synced through to Xero. And remember that chart of accounts has come through from Xero. So we can take a look and have a sneak preview at that as well. Let's just search up dairy for my dairy farm. And you can see here that these are all of the different types of accounts I have set up. I have individual sale accounts for each stock class. I have individual purchase accounts for each stock class. I also have my valuation accounts in there too. And we used to use a single sale and purchase account. We then have our dairy and levy in there as well, which we can map through to our stock tracker. But if we jump back into Figured, let's go ahead and start creating a new stock tracker. So we're going to do that on the Operations tab here in Figured by clicking New Operation Tracker. When you click on that, you'll then be given a full list of all of the different types of trackers that Figured supports. For this one, we're just going to use a dairy cattle tracker. Then you'll be given the choice to give it a name, and you can choose the way that the accounts are set up in Xero. Remembering that we had single sale and purchase accounts, we had individual purchase and sale accounts, we're going to go ahead and swap that over. We can give this a name as well. And then when you save that, Figured is then going to create that new production tracker for you to go ahead and do all your mapping for. Now, I've already gone ahead and done this, so we can go ahead and look at an existing tracker that we have by looking at the tracker settings. And you'll see here that the first thing I did was I managed my enabled stock classes. So not every stock class in Figured is going to be necessary for your clients. You may need to go ahead, disable a few of the extra ones because we have things like autumn heifers and autumn steers down at the bottom here. Just enable the ones that your client needs and then click Save, and then that'll hide them from when they're going to go ahead and create their sales and purchases. Then we have our account mapping that we've already gone through and done too. All of these accounts are just ones that were pulled directly through from Xero. So if there's one that you're missing, you need to go ahead into Xero and create it there first. Going ahead, having done all of our mapping, then we have our opening quantities there, which is the opening quantity on the conversion date. So the earliest use of Figured. Generally, if you're coming on board and you've been working with our enablement team to get it set up, we'll have already entered in this data for you too, created the map, created the tracker and done the mapping, and entered in a comparative year for you too. Once we've gone ahead and created this tracker, and let's save these changes and complete our mapping, I'm now going to show you guys what we're going to be doing long-term in terms of maintenance of the file. So we're going to go ahead and add an actual, and we're going to add an actual purchase for this example. So this is how you add in individual transactions, and we're working upstream specifically in this example. So we're creating the sale or purchase in Figured first, and then posting it through to Xero. So we'll go ahead, purchase, and then now we have a few different options. So this will default to today's date for the purchase, so you can go ahead and change that, either going back if we need to. Then we have our payment dates. So remember that Figured works in both cash and accrual basis. So you can have a purchase date that then gets paid by default 2 weeks later. Then we have our contacts, and these contacts have come through from Xero. So if there's one that you're missing, I recommend going into Xero, creating the contact there, and then syncing the Figured file with Xero. I'm going to use ABC. A Xero reference, which you can put in here as well. And then whether or not the amounts you're entering are tax exclusive or tax inclusive. I'm just going to keep this in tax exclusive for now. And then we can choose whether or not we're going to post this through to Xero. So if you're working upstream, you definitely want this to be ticked. If you're working downstream and adding the transactions into Figured after you've entered them in Xero, you'll want to make sure that isn't ticked so that you don't end up doubling up your data in Xero. Then we can pop in a couple of extra notes in here if we want to, maybe details around that purchase, and then enter in what that purchase specifically is. So let's say we're going to purchase some MA cows. We purchase 50 of them. We can enter in the weight if you want to have that as an output in one of your reports, but for now, I'm going to change this to per head, and let's put it at $800. Then Figured calculates what that GST should be, and we get our total at the bottom here. So as soon as I click Save Transaction, it's going to post it on through to Xero for me. We can add in other stock classes. So that purchase can actually be for quite a few different types of stock, or it could be for different quantities and different amounts. And you can add a non-stock line to this transaction, whether that's an expense associated with the purchase, say for cartage or something, or if you have any premiums or discounts that you need to have calculated in there too. So you can choose any other account when you've got a non-stock line item, and then post through whether that's a positive or a negative amount and choose the tax rate for it. So you get lots of flexibility when it comes to entering these in here. Let me just remove these for now. Then we can save transaction, but if you're going through and creating a lot of these transactions, you can use this little arrow here to save and add another. And then that'll save the transaction for you and then take you to a new page where you can enter in a new one as well. Great if you're doing lots of work at the same time. So let's save that transaction, and that's going to post it through to Xero. And ideally, you'll just be doing that every time there's a sale or a purchase. You can get the farmer to do that as well, since it's so easy to use. And then you can come in and do your aging and balancing through that too. In order to do aging and balancing, you can either add it as actual aging transactions and choose how they move up. But generally, what people will use also is the stock balancer, which is the fast way to enter in those extra transactions that just sit in Figured. When you use the stock balancer, you can choose what your target closing quantity should be. So that's if you're using it at the end of the financial year. Auto age your opening stock, which will push everything up to the next mature stock class. And put in things like aging, say from my R2 heifers, I could age those up into my MA cows and choose what month that occurs in. So if you're using this regularly and regularly doing that aging and regularly entering those purchases and deaths and births and things, this also makes your management valuations really detailed and really up to date. So taking that back, that's how we're entering in those actual transactions. The next thing I want to show you guys is how to create a budget within Figured for your dairy cattle. So we're going to use the date selector up at the top of the page here. You can see right now we're in actuals, but we could also do this in actuals and forecast. But in order to build out our budget, we need to change that to budget. And let's jump ahead and start working in our 2020 budget. Now that we're in here, we want to go through to our budget settings for 2020. And then that'll allow you to enter in what the opening quantities should be for that budget. That allows you to enter in your own figures, or you can update from the latest actual and forecast. So there's flexibility in there depending on when you're working on that budget and what you need to have in there. I'm going to update it from the actuals and forecast from last year. And then here we go, we've pulled that through. So let's go ahead and save that as our opening quantity in there. And then one of the quickest ways to build out that budget, especially for the sales and purchases, is to go through to your tools and then use the reforecaster. So the reforecaster lets you enter in things kind of like how the stock balancer does, but it's for building out the budget instead. So and then if, say, in the next financial year, I'm expecting to purchase some R2 heifers, what I'm doing is I'm clicking where purchases meets the stock class. Then that gives me the option to enter in these purchases per month. So we can go in and say, pop in 20 here for 500 a head. And then once we've entered that in there, Figured will give you the option here to save it. And then that'll create your purchase transaction for the budget. So that's a great way to bring the farmer into the conversation too. They can build out this budget doing the purchases and sales. And you can even use auto age up here as well to push everything up to that next stock class too. So we'll do that as well. This allows you to enter in your births as well and your deaths, and you can use management valuations to show how this valuation would change throughout the year for your budget. So now that we've covered how the dairy cattle tracker would work in terms of adding in your actuals, in terms of the setup, and in terms of the budget, now we're going to go through and take a look at the milk tracker. So let's go back to my trackers here and add a new tracker. So we'll add a new operation tracker. We've got milk here, and then you can give it a name. So let's call it milk tracker 1. You can choose the company that this is applied for. So the reason you get to do that is because we'll load through the company prices, but of course different companies have different structures in terms of their payouts. So if you have just a generalist supplier, you can choose other, and then that'll allow you to manually enter in what you need. Otherwise, I recommend using one of the existing suppliers, say whether you're Fonterra or Open Country or Westland. We load all of these up as they're available. And then you can create that tracker, and then that'll go ahead and build it up for you. Now, same as the dairy cattle tracker, I've actually got a milk tracker that I've set up already. So let's go through to our tracker settings and take a look. The first thing I want you guys to see is the operation type. This is where you can choose whether your client is a farm owner, which will then give them the option to have a contract milker or a share milker on their site for the expenses. Or we can say that they're a share milker, and then that'll allow you to enter in what that share milker share should be. Or a contract milker and what their price should be per kilo of milk solids. I'm going to leave this one as a farm owner for now. And you can see here that we've also mapped our milk income accounts. So Figured only uses 2 milk income accounts. We actually look at the transaction date rather than needing it to be an individual milk account. So we've got a current year and a deferred year account. These ones that I've already mapped and set up. And then further down we have our supply number 2, which is for a Fonterra farmer. If you or your client is a Fonterra farmer, you can enter in their supply number and invite a farm source account. So this is one of Figured's farm source accounts. You can invite us in, and then we can sync the production numbers for you automatically. That means that the kilograms of milk solid can come through straight away. It means that you can just handle things in Xero. And then at the end of the year, we do have a little process, which I'll show you in a few ticks, to get the accruals working properly as well. So we can say, for this one, for my client, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I can invite the Figured farm source name Figured 5, and then there are some settings that you need to invite us with, and you can find how to do that per these instructions here, or you can also find that inside of our help center here by searching up farm source. There it is down there. And then let's take a look at some more of those farm manager settings. So I set this as a farm owner, which means that we can have a contract milker or we can have a share milker on site. So I'm going to use farm manager up here. This will give me the option to configure what type they are. So in this case, I'm using a share milker. We can see the different options up here. And then this allows you to map it through to an expense account. And the reason we let you do that is because Figured can calculate what that share milker payout should be, or what the contractor milk payout should be, based on the settings that you provide us. So all you really need to do is just focus on the production quantities as well as the milk prices, and then we calculate what the rest of the payout should be, and then what they are for the share milker or the contract milker. You can change these percentages or change the contract prices as well per year, which allows you to update values down here, and you can enter in what that new percentage should be from which year. So if, for example, my 30% share milker is now rising to a 50%, I can save that, and then from now on, Figured will calculate a 50% payout from the production that we receive. So let's go back to that setup. And then we can map our dairy NZ levy. So you don't have to do that, but if you do, then of course Figured can calculate what that levy calculation should be. Then you can map that through to an expense account, and that can also appear next to your milk tracker reports at the end of the year. So let's go ahead and save these changes now. What Figured then does is it recalculates things looking at the new setting that we changed. So let's jump back to 2019, and let's jump back to our actuals and take a look at that first. So if I had set up my farm source integration, the production kilo of milk solids, it would have come through automatically. Because I haven't done that, I'll need to manually enter them in. So I can do that here. That's our first column. The next one we're looking at is the company milk price, which is the payout price that Figured is loaded on the back end. You can diverge from that price, and that's what the your milk price column is. So if, for example, this figure was incorrect, you could enter in your own milk price in there. And when it comes to budgeting, that's how we're going to be budgeting what those payouts should be too. Then we have capacity adjustments, which come through. Then the standard payment and the further payments columns, these are going to be used for our budgets and our forecast. Then this season payout, and then the deferred income. So because we're looking at actuals here, this season payment and this season's deferred income payment is actually coming through directly from Xero. Remembering that it's so important for Xero to be up to date because that's our source of truth. In order for you to do this quickly as well, we've set up this milk tracker that you can just cash code those payments as they come on through. And then we'll use the milk journals tool to do the accrual for the previous month. So just as the money comes in, cash code it in. And then head through to the advisor tab. Go through to the account journals page here. Picking our year and picking our milk income account. So let's use current year. we'll look at all the values that are sitting there in Xero. And then we can use a helper here to shift things 1 month before cash. So that means a figure will look at the value that's sitting in Xero, looking at their cash date, and then generate the journal entry to accrue that in the previous month. So that means that your milk tracker will show correct at the end of the year when it comes to looking at your trading statements. So we can go ahead, click next. Then you get the option to choose your contra account. So let's use accounts receivable, for example. In this particular example, I haven't updated any of the balances, but when you do that, you'll then get another confirmation before Figured posts through the 12 different journal entries to shift the accrual back. And then that's something that you'll do to get the milk trading statement correct. So the point of all of that is to say that enter in your actuals as they come in and enter in those milk payments as they come in. And then at the end of the year, you can look at the accrual for that and then shift everything back so that your milk trading statement comes out correct. So let's head back to our milk tracker. So that's how we're entering in actuals. The production could come through automatically, or you can manually enter it in. The milk prices we're going to alert you to if there's any changes, and that's why we have this reset to latest milk price button up at the top corner here. Then we have the payments that'll be coming through from Xero that you've been cash coding throughout the year. And then when it comes to building out your budget, let's go ahead, shift this over to the budget, and then let's go look at this for 2020. So for 2020, we don't have the Fonterra milk prices just yet, so we can use our own milk prices in here. So let's put in our own production and say our own milk price in there, just for now. Then we can go in and enter in what that deferred income should be. But instead of manually entering in the deferred income, so long as your last year's forecast is up to date, you can update the deferred here, and then that'll automatically pull through the last season's forecast payments. So remembering that in Figured, every budget is unique. So that means that you've got a fixed start date and a fixed end date where you manually enter in your opening quantities. And that gives you the most flexibility in terms of designing your budget. You can keep your forecast up to date, and then we can pull in those figures by using that update deferred button as well as forecast overflows. So we're budgeting for our price and we're budgeting for our production here specifically. As soon as you've done that, save changes. And then once you do that, Figured will calculate what that payment should be so that you can look at your budget on a cash basis or on a profit basis too. So that's how we're entering in for our budget in there, resetting to the latest prices when they're available, looking at the update deferred and the forecast overflows when you've kept your forecast up to date. And it's really important to keep your forecast up to date. When it comes to bringing May, paid June income into your budget as well, we're going to use the forecast overflow here to take that cash transaction from the previous year and then bring that into your 2020 budget for this example. Just to quickly recap some of that here. Budgeting livestock can be used by starting from last year's actuals, or you can do it from a fresh slate. Another really quick way to build out your livestock budget is to export last year's actuals and then re-import those in again. And there's a really great help doc in our help center which can take you through how that works. The reforecaster is designed to look really similar to a tally sheet for those budgets, so you can get an idea of those sales and purchases, either entering them in yourself or asking the farmer directly to enter them in. You can choose dates, stock classes, quantities, dollar amounts, and even weights in there as well. So you can build out as much of a detailed budget as you'd like. When it comes to budgeting for milk, we really want to make sure that last year's forecast is up to date so that we can bring in those deferred payments and bring in that May, pay June income. Specifically, when you're building out this budget, you're looking at production and price. We can make it easy for you by doing the share milker calculations and doing the contract milker calculations as well, but really looking at production and price. The last thing I want to show everyone here are some of the production reports that sit in Figured. So we can bring in, using additional options on many of your reports, things like sale quantities or production numbers, and that's in things like your cash flow report and your profit and loss. That's where you start bringing in the unique Figured data into the rest of your financial data too. Then we have production reports, which allows you to see a per hectare or a per kilogram of milk solid breakdown. So that production report is looking at the data you've been entering in, say, for your budget or for your actuals, and is a really unique report that you can generate out of here. And the last thing as well is that you can create benchmarks for your firm with all of your dairy clients. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about benchmarking, we do have a webinar on our YouTube channel. Otherwise, if you're interested in it for your firm, please reach out to our customer success team and we can put you in touch with someone to get that all sorted out for you too. So let's jump in and take a look at some of those production reports. The first thing I want to show you is where those additional options are and how to bring in the production quantities in there. So let's take a look at our cash flow, for example. Now, this will be pulling through data from Xero, but what we can also do is go to our additional options, so up in the top right-hand corner here, and then show quantities. And when you show quantities and run that report, we'll add in an additional line to those tracker mapped accounts to show you what those quantities were. Then we can use those additional options for lots of other things too. We can do comparisons with the next year's budget or with this year's budget. Or we can change this to say, look at things annually and then compare it with the last couple of years. So there's a lot of flexibility in there. Another neat trick is to go through to your reporting period and changing it to say a month or to a custom if you want to see a longer date range. So if you want to see say a 15-month cash flow, say your client has changed their balance date, you can do that within Figured by doing it to custom and then increasing the number of previous periods that you're comparing it to. So those are the additional options you can bring through. The other thing I want to show you is that production report that's sitting there in Figured. This can either show information from all of your different trackers, depending on the year and depending on the set of data you want to show as well. And under these additional options, we can see this either on a cash or on an accrual basis. But the output of all of this is your production report showing you things like the expenses or income based on each kilogram of milk solid you produced, or based on the effective hectares of the farm. And you can set that figure inside of the settings for the file. We don't have a very detailed file on this one here, just because this is a demo file, but when you come to your clients, I recommend jumping into their reports and taking a look at some of this really unique information. And the last thing I want to talk about is the enablement team here at Figured. So if you're bringing 10 or more clients on board, get in touch and we can provide you some resources in terms of training and in terms of enablement for entering in comparative data. So that means if you're bringing 10 or more on board, we can set up the files for you. We can link them in with Xero. We can do your tracker mappings and bring that on through for you. And then you can have last year's actuals in there already so that you have a comparative base to start from. If you'd like to learn more about enablement or if you have more questions around account setups, you can reach out to our team using the green chat bubble in the bottom right-hand corner of every page in Figured. That's where you can start a live chat with our team. If there's something we can't explain over text, we're always more than happy to pick up the phone and give you a call too. Otherwise, you can find our help center in there too, as well as all of our upcoming webinars, which you can register for in there. So that takes us to the end of today's webinar for Figured for Dairy Farms. Thank you very much for attending. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next week as well for our webinar on scenarios.